Hey guys, we're going to start talking about coral reefs today. It's an important ecosystem. It's the one that we cover that's not native to New England, but is something that is one, very important because it's an indicator of other environmental factors in the ocean and how sort of the health of the ocean is doing. And it's also something that if you're going to go interact with one type of ocean ecosystem, chances are it will be a coral reef because it's a popular tourist attraction. So there's a sheet to follow along in, so fill out the notes. You can pause the video and then come back to this. Coral reefs are unique in that they are both living and geological, so like rock-based structures. So they are, because of the way they're formed. The geological part is made out of calcium carbonate, which is deposited by the exoskeletons or the skeletons of the corals themselves. And as they grow, they lay down this calcium carbonate structure, and then they have sort of living fleshy bodies on top of it, and then they die and they are replaced over and over again. And that builds the reef itself. So the reef is both fragile and it takes a very long time to grow. So the corals themselves are small sessile cnidarians. That word, the C is silent. And they live as polyps, which is this form here. It is different than a medusa form, which would be the planktonic early forms of them. At night, in particular, they eat zooplankton, so they are animals and they are carnivorous. They float for a while, and then when they come, like, sort of grow too big to be their floating life forms, they land, and if they land in an ideal place, then they will take root and form this this polyp form. And they can reproduce sexually, or they can clone themselves. And they tend to clone themselves and make a whole sort of a colony around themselves. They do have tentacles, and the tentacles is what makes them cnidarians, and they sting. All right, so let's look at the anatomy of the coral. So you have this with, and you should label the parts. I don't have the numbers here, so I'm not going to put the number, not tell you about the numbers. But you go fill them in, and then pause it, fill them in, and then come back to this, and we'll talk about it. So now that you're back, you have the skeleton here that is made out of calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate is sometimes called limestone. So this is sort of the foundation, the geological foundation for the living tissue that's on top of it. So here's the polyp form. It has a singular mouth and anus, so it will, and a digestive cavity, a gastrovascular sac. And so the cnidarian, the nematocysts here, the stinging cells on the tentacles, will stun zooplankton, so you're talking about very little things, and then they will sort of shove it inside the mouth. And you'll see this much bigger in other, like, that you can, they get bigger and you can sort of see it happen. I'll try to attach a video and have you guys watch a video of that. So they do sting their prey and then shove the prey into the gastrovascular cavity where they get digested, and then whatever it can't be digestive is sort of pushed out of the mouth, which that makes it also the anus. A fun thing about the corals is that they are actually have two different organisms living inside them. They have zooxanthellae, which are photosynthetic organisms, like a red-green algae, that live inside them, and that helps them survive by making sugars through photosynthesis. So they are a symbiotic organism. All right, so this has to do with how they live. So you have so again, pause, write down the things, and then come back. So zooxanthellae, which is how you say that first word, and coralline red algae. So the corals have both these zooxanthellae photosynthetic organisms that live inside the coral. They also are helpful in making calcium carbonate, that CaCO3 is calcium carbonate, faster, which makes them stronger. And then when they're not hunting for zooplankton at night, during the day, they can carry out photosynthesis because the zooxanthellae are photosynthetic. And then they help form, in particularly, a good example of this is the coralline red algae, which you can find. You can find that here. They grow on rocks in hard sheets, and they they're one of the stronger parts of the reef, and they help keep the reef in place. Calcium carbonate is not particularly robust as a chemical, so a compound, and so it can be broken up really hard, which is why when you're on a reef, that one of the things they tell you to do is to be very gentle with the reef, not step on it because you'll break it. Okay, so places where you can find a coral reef. This is a very important thing to know. There will be a quiz on this later. You can only find the coral reefs have very specific conditions under which they can form. They need to be in shallow water because of that zooxanthellae needs light to exist, and so they can't be in deep water because once you get past the photic zone, there's not enough light for that to maintain. So you find them around continental shelves where it's shallower, or at seamounts, which are just mountains in the ocean. So that makes it, there are parts of that, the tops of the seamounts are very shallow, and then on the perimeter of islands. So you find people a lot of times going to islands and finding that there are coral reefs around there, and that's part of their tourism industry, is to have people come and scuba dive or snorkel at the coral reefs because they have beautiful coral and beautiful fishes. All right, so, but a big star circle around this is one of the most important things that you must know, is that in order to have a coral reef grow and maintain, it needs to be light, and that means it needs 30 meters of water or less. This is also what makes this a great tourist thing, because you don't have to scuba dive. You can snorkel. Several of them are like, you can see great coral reefs within, the top. They're, 6 feet underwater, so they're not very deep at all. You need to have a temperature of 25 to 31 degrees Celsius. That's 77 to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. That's actually, again, an excellent temperature for swimming. You can swim for a long time in that. If they were in 50-degree water, then you get hypothermia by the time you were done seeing them. And then you need a salinity of 34 to 37 parts per million of salinity, which is what you find in the tropics. All right, so as I said before and at the beginning of this, coral reefs are really important for saying indicators of the health of the ocean in general. The ocean is not particularly healthy, and coral reefs are showing that. So global warming is a huge threat to coral reefs because as the world gets hotter, that range of temperature, which you found, we're going to go back, this is a very narrow range of temperature, 77 to 88 degrees Fahrenheit. If it gets over 88 degrees Fahrenheit, the coral reef will start to bleach, and bleaching is bad. Bleaching is what happens when they die. So you can see bleaching here. So normally speaking, they have these robust and vibrant colors, and they, but then if that doesn't happen, they, when it gets hotter than that, they bleach because the coral organisms themselves have died. Because they are big tourist traps, and tourists, tend to be, not tuned in to the ecological sort of milieu of the place where they are, you can find tourists that are damaged, that, you know, divers, this person's walking on the coral reef, that's ruining the coral reef that the person is stepping on. Also, coral, you know, just to be honest, people who are out on vacation might be drinking. They might not understand the language of the person who is giving them dive instructions. So there's lots of reasons that tourists are incredibly damaging to what they've come to see. Another really interesting one is the crown of thorns starfish. I'm going to attach a video to that, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but they are an invasive species that are incredibly damaging to the coral. All right, so let's talk about different types of coral reefs. There is a fringing reef. So if you look at this little picture, a fringing reef is when you have a space offshore and there's not a big lagoon. It's just the coral, you run off and you have this sort of shallow, what do you think of, sort of like a long beachy area that's below the tide mark, and then you have a nice space for coral reefs out here. And you find a lot of that in the Red Sea and in dry climates, so that just sort of like steady runs out to the ocean until you have a fall off. Barrier reefs are further away from shore, and you have a lagoon where you do not have any reef, so you go out further, and then there is this fringe on the outside, and that gives you, so further away you have a reef away from the shore. And the Great Barrier Reef is a good example of this. The Great Barrier Reef is the biggest reef in Australia, and it is apparently remarkable. And if you get a chance to go see it, if we ever get to travel again, you should go, because it will be dead in your lifetime. And then there's an atoll. An atoll is something that is without land, so it is out by itself. It tends to be the top of a seamount, which again is just like a mountain in the ocean. And it is usually circular shape with a lagoon in the middle, so it's like it is really like a circle in the water. And they're very neat, and they tend to be better preserved because they are more isolated. So you can see here, you can see what the 3 different types of them. Barrier, atoll, fringing. All right, so that completes your notes. Please, when you're done typing them up, submit them so you can get credit for them, and then move on. I will post some videos for you to watch later in the week.